Imagine an entire town cursed to dance, not with joy, but with agony. In the summer of 1518, the streets of Strasbourg filled with men and women twisting, convulsing, and collapsing, unable to stop their bodies from moving. Some danced for hours, some for days, some until they died. This is the true story of the dancing plague. It was July 1518. Strasbourg, a bustling hub of trade on the Rhine in the Holy Roman Empire, bustled with markets and merchants. But prosperity hid fear. The past decade had been cruel. Harsh winters and crop failures left many hungry. Grain prices soared beyond what families could afford. Disease swept through cramped quarters. Outbreaks of smallpox and dysentery haunted every street. Religion, once comforting, had fractured. The Protestant Reformation was spreading unrest, and fear of God's wrath was thick in the air. In a world without antibiotics or germ theory, unseen forces seemed to rule life and death. Saints were prayed to for protection, demons blamed when crops failed or children fell ill. Stress and hunger simmered just below the surface. It was here, amid famine, sickness, and superstition, that something unimaginable would break loose. And yet, Strasbourg's nightmare wasn't completely unprecedented. Europe had seen strange outbreaks before, so-called dancing manias from Aachen to Basel, where groups convulsed in the streets. Chroniclers called it Saint Vitus's dance, but never had it struck with the ferocity about to unfold. It began quietly. One morning, a woman named Frau Troffea stepped from her home and began to dance. Slowly at first, awkward, jerky steps, then more violently. She couldn't stop. Hours passed, sweat drenched her dress, her feet began to bleed. Some believed she was possessed, others cursed. At night, she collapsed from exhaustion. But at dawn, she rose again. Within a week, 30 joined her. Farmers, merchants' wives, children, all seized by the same compulsion. They danced until they fell, then crawled back to their feet and danced again. By late July, the epidemic swelled. Squares overflowed with writhing bodies, laughing, crying, screaming, limbs flailing beyond control, shoes shredded to ribbons. Eyewitnesses described feet worn raw, ribs cracked from convulsions. Children watched parents collapse. Shopkeepers barred doors. Townsfolk whispered of divine anger. But still, the dancers came. City leaders met in panic. Physicians dismissed demons and instead spoke of hot blood, an overheated body fluid driving frenzy. The prescription? Let the victims dance it out. So the council built wooden platforms and hired musicians and professional dancers, hoping to contain and cure the mania. They turned squares into grim carnivals. But the plan failed. Music only drove the afflicted harder, faster, until bodies collapsed lifeless mid-song. The so-called cure became a death sentence. When medicine failed, the desperate turned to faith. Victims were carried to a shrine of Saint Vitus, protector of dancers and epileptics. There, priests prayed, sprinkled holy water, performed rituals to break the curse. Pilgrimages wound through city gates, families wept and bargained with heaven. Yet even holy rites could not stop the wild dance. Contemporary chronicles tell of entire families undone. Parents tied to posts to stop their frantic limbs. Ropes snapped as the urge returned. Merchants shuttered shops. Children cried as mothers and fathers crumpled to the ground, only to rise again and dance. Even hardened soldiers refused to intervene. It was as if the city itself had lost control of its body. Centuries later, scholars still debate what really happened. Mass hysteria. One theory points to profound psychological trauma. Strasbourg was starving and frightened. Disease and death surrounded every home. Such pressure may have triggered what's now called mass psychogenic illness, where terror itself spreads like infection. Ergot poisoning. Another suspect's bread tainted with ergot, a hallucinogenic fungus that thrives on damp rye. Its toxins can cause convulsions, delirium, and muscle spasms. Modern LSD derives from ergot, but could an entire city have consumed enough to break its mind and body? Religious curse. To the faithful, no explanation was needed. They believed Saint Vitus, or perhaps the devil himself, had cursed Strasbourg. Shrines and offerings were meant to appease supernatural wrath. Most likely, the truth lay in a tangle of starvation, stress, tainted food, and fear. A perfect storm in a city already on edge. Then, almost as abruptly as it began, the dancing waned. By September, streets once full of thrashing bodies were empty and still. Survivors limped home, exhausted, some permanently injured. Families mourned those who collapsed and never rose again. Officials filed reports, but offered no answers. Life moved on, but the wound lingered. The Strasbourg outbreak remained the largest but not the only dancing mania. Smaller flare-ups struck parts of Europe into the 1600s. Over time, the event became a cautionary tale about fear and belief, an early glimpse of how psychological strain and superstition can devastate entire communities. Today, historians revisit these accounts to understand mass panic, trauma, and the strange ways our minds and bodies respond to crisis. But to the people of 1518, no theory could erase the memory of neighbors who danced themselves to death. The dancing plague of 1518 remains one of history's most haunting mysteries. Was it poison, mass hysteria, or something darker? For one summer in Strasbourg, death came not with silence, but with music. Would you have survived the dancing plague? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe to Silent Shadows of History for more dark and forgotten tales.